You are watching this report from a rather fancy restaurant in Paris. I am very glad to be here because today we are going to talk about an interesting question, which is, behind every empire, there is a Don. And the reason why I say it like that is because I believe the thesis applies both ways. The statement can be read both ways. So there is a Don behind every empire, and empires are built by Dons. And just for those of you who don't know what a Don means or stands for, it doesn't mean the donation, the charitable act. No, not at all. It comes from the Italian word. It's a title which means Mr. or Mister. So the original meaning was a respectful form of address for a respectable member of the community. But then later on, the word gained some criminal connotations. So now when we say Don, we refer to the head of a mafia family. And these days, Don is used to describe any kind of crime boss, the leader of a crime syndicate. So let's go back to our initial thesis. Behind every empire, there is a Don. As I said, it can be read two ways. First, behind every empire, there is a Don, a crime boss. And second, empires are built by Dons. Let's start with the first reading. So let me show you something. This is my favorite part of the restaurant. Look at this amazing view. You have the Champs de Mars right there, right next to it. The Champs-Élysées starts. And if you walk all the way down, you will end up at the Arc de Triomphe. But I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to turn left here and go into this little park. And then we find the Invalides nearby. And here's Napoleon's tomb. That's why I love this place so much, because just think about it. There are three symbols of three different types of power buried here. You have Napoleon, the emperor. He represents a type of power based on military force, conquest, expansion. Then you have the Arc de Triomphe, which was built to glorify the victories of the French nation. Then you have the Dome of the Church, which is the biggest dome in France. It was built by Louis XIV, the Sun King. So you have military power, you have nationalistic power, and you have religious power. And they are all buried or symbolized here in this tiny space. Why am I telling you this? Because I want to tell you about the relationship between power and violence. Power without violence is basically irrelevant. There might be some utopian ideas of government based on consensus, but in reality, power is always built on top of violence or the threat of violence. Nowadays, the state has a monopoly on violence within its territory. That wasn't always the case. Until the 19th century, the state had to constantly contend with various types of non-state actors who also possessed violence, such as bandits, outlaws, pirates, smugglers, rebels, etc. These people were dangerous because they threatened the social order and the stability of the state. For this reason, states would often employ mercenaries or create special forces to deal with them. Now, if you look at the origin stories of some of the most famous mafias, you will notice a common thread. They all started as groups of mercenaries who fought for one side or another during some kind of conflict. So in the case of the Sicilian Mafia, their origins can be traced back to the Spanish soldiers who came over to help fight the Arabs. In the case of the Japanese Yakuza, their origins can be traced back to the samurai class. The Chinese triads were formed by members of secret societies who rebelled against the Qing dynasty. And the Russian thieves' world emerged from the ranks of Cossacks who fought against the Polish nobles. What's important to understand here is that violence is the ultimate currency of power. And so if you possess violence but you have no state apparatus to contain it, then you can use that violence to create your own parallel structures of power. You can set your own rules. You can extract resources from others. You can create your own informal courts to dispense justice according to your own standards. And this is how organized crime groups become the shadow governments of entire regions. And this is why I said that behind every empire there is a Don. The Mafia is an alternative system of government. It's a parallel structure of power that runs alongside the official one. But it's not only the Mafia. Organized crime is just one example. Let me give you another example. Piracy. Pirates are also a form of organized crime. They're privateers who operate outside the law, and they prey on the riches of the high seas. And they, too, offer an alternative type of government because they have their own internal organization and decision-making processes. But pirates aren't just violent outlaws. They were sometimes indispensable to the functioning of the state. Because until the late 19th century, navies were the only ones that could really protect trade. But guess who had the most powerful navy in the world? Britain. And what did that mean for the rest of the nations? It meant that British merchants enjoyed an unfair advantage because they didn't have to worry about being attacked on the high seas. Everyone else did. So many of them turned to piracy as a means of defending themselves against the British. The most famous victims of pirates were actually Chinese junks. By the 1720s, the Chinese had devised elaborate anti-piracy measures to defend their ships. But despite that, pirates were still a major problem. So much so that the Chinese government actually employed some of them. The government would offer them noble titles and grants of wealth in exchange for their services. Same thing happened in Europe. Most European nations realized that fighting pirates was too expensive and too risky. So instead, they offered them noble titles and economic rewards. So you could become a baron by capturing enemy ships. So to sum up this first point, I would say that behind every empire there is a don, because violence is the currency of power, and wherever there is power, there is violence. Let us now move on to the second reading of our thesis, which says that empires are built by dons, or in other words, empires are built by organized crime groups. And to make sense of this, let us return to our previous examples, the Mafia and piracy. Let's start with the Mafia. The origins of the Mafia can be found in the feudal system of Sicily. At the time, the island was ruled by the Sicilian nobility, and they relied on the Mafia to help enforce their laws and collect taxes. And so, the Mafia became an extension of the state. They were basically the shock troops of the ruling class. And if you think about it, that's a pretty unique position to be in. Not only were the mafiosi exempt from paying taxes, but they were also the ones who collected taxes from everyone else. So it was a very lucrative business. In fact, it was so lucrative that the Mafia eventually became the main source of income for the state. So if you wanted to build infrastructure, you had to pay the Mafia. If you wanted to defend yourself against outside threats, you had to pay the Mafia. Basically, if you wanted to do anything, you had to pay the Mafia. So in essence, the Mafia became the hidden hand that controlled the state. They were the ones who pulled the strings from behind the curtain. And if you don't believe me, just look at the history of post-unification Italy. The Mafia became so powerful that they were able to influence elections, control entire regions, and even assassinate prime ministers. But it's not only the Mafia. Organized crime groups have been essential to the functioning of states throughout history. For example, the evolution of racketeering in Japan. In medieval Japan, extortion was rampant among the peasantry, and it was usually carried out by local gangsters called yakuza. The yakuza were so powerful that they were able to extort money from merchants and even samurai. So the shogunate decided to co-opt them and put them to work as tax collectors. And that's how the modern Japanese mafia was born. Okay, so let's get back to our thesis. Empires are built by dons. And let me tell you something. Organized crime groups are perfect for building empires, because they possess several qualities that make them ideal candidates for this task. First of all, they are highly disciplined and secretive. This allows them to carry out complex operations without drawing attention to themselves. Second, they are extremely well organized. They have clear hierarchies and chains of command. And third, they are totally ruthless. They are not afraid to use violence to achieve their goals. And fourth, they are highly adaptive. They are able to change their strategies and tactics as needed. And fifth, they are deeply embedded in the local population. This gives them access to a lot of valuable information. And sixth, they have a lot of resources at their disposal. Organized crime groups are involved in a lot of different criminal activities, which means that they have a lot of money flowing through their organizations. Finally, they are not constrained by traditional morality. They are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve their goals. In conclusion, organized crime groups are perfect for building empires because they possess all the qualities that are necessary for such a task. We've talked about the historical roots of the Mafia and how it evolved into one of the most powerful criminal organizations of all time. You should check out this video up here where I analyze the role of the Mafia in the unification of Italy. Also, if you want to better understand global politics, follow along for more content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.